Oh man, I'm really enjoying my Powkitty RGB 30. Wait, what's this? Greetings, Retro Zoltan here. Today we're diving into the Anbernic RG Cube XX. When Powkitty released the RGB 30, I thought the whole 1x1 screen concept had already been done and dusted. But Anbernic decided to jump in anyway. So let's explore the Cube XX, how it came to be, whether it stands up to the Powkitty RGB 30, and if this device was really needed in the first place. To start off with, Anbernic didn't send this to me. This was actually a Christmas gift from 2024. And I cherish it just as much as the person who gave it to me. So thank you. While I'm more than happy to review items donated to the channel, I have to say it's a huge compliment to be approached by a company to review a product. I look forward to the day when one reaches out to me directly, but hey, I'll leave the honor to the bigger channels. For now. I'm kidding, I totally suck. Speaking of big channels, one of the most popular handheld gaming reviewers, Russ from Retro Game Core, is definitely someone to envy. Rumor has it that he was the driving force behind the creation of the Cube. Now, I can't confirm that it's true, but I wouldn't be surprised. Companies like Anbernic seem to pay close attention to what reviewers are saying. This style of device was something people were asking for, but it's interesting that Anbernic took the gamble after Powkitty already did. And even more interesting that they released not one, but two versions. These two versions, of course, are the RGB Cube and the RGB Cube XX. The RGB Cube XX comes around an average of $60 US, depending on if you throw in an SD full of games or a case. While it's assumed they will be fully loaded with games, I've heard some people getting surprised with no games. So keep that in mind if you go to purchase one of these. Mine came in black, but there's also the white one, which gives me a Nintendo Wii Classic controller vibe, and a Game Boy Original DMG gray. Unboxing the Cube was no surprise. It's Anbernic after all. The console was covered by a foam insert snugly tucked into its box. In fact, it fits so perfectly that I had trouble getting it out on occasion. Because of this, I usually keep it outside the box, even though I know I should store everything together. Inside the box, you'll find the expected instruction booklet, a small box with USB-C cable, and to my surprise, an SD that I initially missed when I first powered it on. I loved the look of this thing immediately. When I first saw pictures, I was hesitant, but in person it looks incredible. It has great weight, and everything is exactly where I want it to be. I'm incredibly impressed, and I know I'm going to love this console. My large hands throw people off on how big this thing is for real, so here are a few comparisons to help you out. Anbernic's D-pads are usually flawless, and I'm surprised to see the circular design reminiscent of the Sega controller here. Fun fact, Sega actually called this directional pad the D button. Having loved the D-pad on the RG Arc D, I'm confident this one will perform just as well. Just wasn't expecting this style, honestly. But it looks good here. It feels nice and I'm excited to test it out. The ABXY buttons are the perfect size and are very satisfying to press. They're labeled clearly and I have no complaints. There's also the start and select buttons side by side, which I always appreciate. There's also a menu button on the opposite side, tucked neatly out of the way. I love having a dedicated button for exiting games without any fuss. The analog sticks feel fine, no complaints here. They light up and have some cool effects when powered on, but I'll cover that later. They're also clickable, which is a feature I always look for. While I know people have mixed feelings about these sticks, they meet my expectations so far. The screen is a nearly 4-inch square OCA with laminated goodness sporting a 720 by 720 resolution. It's sharp and vibrant, and I'm grateful for it. However, I'm curious to see how it handles games designed for other aspect ratios, like the PSP's 16 by 9 on a 1x1 display. The top features stacked trigger and shoulder buttons, which I love. They feel great and even have a nice texture. They're perfect in my opinion. Other components on top include a start button, a volume rocker switch, USB OTG charging port, reset button, and mini HDMI out. It has everything I look for in a handheld. The bottom houses 2 speaker slits, which sound fine, although I wish they didn't look so similar to the SD card slots. Speaking of SD slots, this device has 2, one for the operating system and one for the games, and I always appreciate the setup. You'll also find a headphone jack here, which is perfectly placed in my opinion. As for the overall design, it feels fantastic in my hands. The weight might not be for everyone, but I love it. And on the back, there's a textured grip that makes a huge difference for me. I know I'll love this especially during long gaming sessions. The hardware feels great, and it includes everything I could want. I wouldn't change a thing. Official stats for the RGB Cube XX are the following. Again, the screen is almost a 4-inch laminated OCA IPS screen with 720 by 720 resolution. The CPU is an H700 quad-core ARM Cortex A53. The GPU is a dual-core G31MP2. It's got 1 gig of RAM. It's got Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, 3800 milliamp hour battery, which lasts about 5 hours, and HDMI out. Booting up the system is pretty fast, and the LED rings around the analog stick stand out pretty quickly. I admit I was kind of hesitant on these when I first saw them on the Trim UI, but now everything's doing it. And with the stock OS, you can control the colors pretty easily. I myself really enjoy making them a bright green. Maybe it's a Star Trek fan of me, but now it's a Borg cube. In all seriousness, though, you have a million colors to choose from, and lighting effects to satisfy any user. Or if you want to give yourself a stroke, there's always the monochromatic rainbow setting. Wow, that's just... damn, okay. The Anbernic RG Cube XX comes pre-installed with a custom Linux-based operating system tailored for retro gaming. Overall, I like it. Simple and effective. You have a mix of game room and RetroArch games, among other features that will get you going quickly. Out of the box, the RGB Cube XX can play the following systems: PSP, PlayStation, CPS 1 through 3, Neo Geo, MAME, Final Burn Neo, Sega Master System, Sega Mega Drive, Sega 32X, PC Engine, Neo Geo Pocket, Sega Game Gear, and WonderSwan. With the use of RetroArch, you can also play Open Board, Dreamcast, Atari 2600, Sega CD, MSX, PC Engine CD, Pico 8, Sega Saturn, and a handful of ports for those who really like digging for games. I mean, Quake Rogue? Yes, please. And if you want to add more, you can do so also. Games played at some good speeds. I tried a lot of systems, even more taxing ones like PSP and Dreamcast worked, and didn't disappoint. Some games had issues, of course, but it's to be expected, and can be remedied by tweaking RetroArch settings if you're into that sort of thing. So if you were listening carefully, I didn't mention any Nintendo system. Curious, right? Not one Nintendo game is on here. I've heard this is starting to happen for Nintendo games, but a removal of the entire system seems a bit of a bigger omission than I originally expected. I'm guessing Nintendo's lawyers are just at the door of Anbernic now. But it's an easy fix if you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, just reach out and I'll try to help. Just don't tell Nintendo.
You didn't see anything.
I'm guessing big targets like Anbernic, Trim UI, and Powkiddy are going to have to deal with this as time goes on. Good luck, you guys. Anyway, the only system I had a rough time with was playing Nintendo DS games, which to be fair isn't my favorite to emulate, but possible after adding the control settings through RetroArch, which might be a rough time if it's new to you. I didn't struggle at all with the D-pad, and whenever I chose to switch to the analog stick, it was always pre-configured and ready to work. Exiting some games by pressing the menu button, for the most part, works, but it may pop you into the RetroArch menu, which you might not be familiar with. If this happens to you, push B, scroll down to quit, and push A. It's going to happen the more you explore this thing, so be ready. I did run into a few games that didn't load at all. Nothing unexpected, just something to note. I also ran into a few lockups on certain games also, but an easy fix with the reset on the top. Fortunately, the system always seems to recover without a problem, but if you find yourself doing it more than not, then I recommend backing up your OS SD card sooner than later. Widescreen systems like the Sony PSP are among the least ideal to emulate on a 1x1 square screen, as their 16:9 aspect ratio results in significant black bars, making the display feel less immersive. Classic consoles such as the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, which uses a 4:3 ratio, will also require black bars or bezels on the sides to fit the square screen properly. Handheld systems like the Game Boy Advance with its 3:2 ratio face similar compromises. On the other hand, systems like the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color with near square resolutions look great with minimal adjustments. Additionally, emulation for Pico 8 and certain arcade titles designed with square or near square resolutions scale beautifully to the screen. Which kind of gets me to understand why Anbernic came out with the Cube XX soon after the Cube, which was more powerful to play. While the hardware wasn't limiting, the screen certainly was. So why bother getting excited about PlayStation 2 emulation when it's going to be squished on a square screen anyway? I think the Cube was overkill. So a cheaper option that doesn't venture too far past N64 is the way to go if it's cheaper. I also gave the HDMI output a try. And honestly, I realize it's not something this device really needed. Systems that look great on the square screen often look stretched and awkward on a widescreen. If you're not comfortable with navigating RetroArch settings, you might find yourself struggling to adjust aspect ratios, bezels, and screen stretching. It's not impossible, but it's not exactly plug and play either. Personally, I'm happy with the stock firmware. It's something I don't say very often. But if for some reason it's not your thing, there are alternatives, of course, ready to go. MinUI, of course, is available, as always, if you're a minimalist. And there's Nelly, a fork of Back to Sierra, utilizing the emulation station front end. And if you prefer options, MUOS has you covered with a load of features stock will be missing. Everyone wins. But I'm staying with stock, and proud of it. So, what do I think of the Anbernic RG Cube XX? If you're excited about the square screen, this is the system to get. I thought I loved the Powkiddy RGB30. And I do, but the Cube XX just feels better. It fits my hands perfectly. And everything I want is right where I want it to be. For me, it's perfect for the games I want to play, and it's easily one of my top 5 handhelds so far. If you couldn't care less about the square screen, this is probably not a device for you. If you prefer widescreen gaming, or don't care about emulating systems like Pico 8, you're not going to love this. The novelty of the square screen is where the appeal lies. Outside from that, trying to play something like PSP games on this thing is more of a pain than it's worth. And that's all I have to say about the Anbernic RG Cube XX, one that I have been keeping around me lately that I'm really enjoying. If you're looking for like-minded individuals that like to chat with others about retro gaming, including myself, please accept this invite to the official Retro Zoltan Discord. I also have a Patreon that's fairly new that will in time have videos, downloads, and tutorials that only members will have access to. But even watching or liking this video helps me, so thank you so much. I couldn't and wouldn't do this without you. It means the world to me. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye.